Hello and welcome back to the course on blockchain. And today we're talking about the dreaded 51% attack. If you've been following this course and reading the supplementary materials, or you've been just talking to people about blockchain, then one way or another you've probably already come across the 51% attack, and maybe somebody's mentioned it or you've read it somewhere. And this is an attack that it's a hypothetical attack, but it could possibly happen, and it's commonly feared or discussed by blockchainers and miners because it's so interesting, and also because of the consequences that it can have. And today we'll talk about two things. First, we'll talk about what the 51% attack is not, and then we'll talk about what the 51% attack is. So let's start with the first one. The 51% attack is not an attack designed to tamper with an individual or select blocks. This is not the 51% attack. The reason for that is why I decided that it's important for us to mention this is because back in module 1, remember how long ago that was, when we were still just learning the bare foundations of blockchain? Well, we had a tutorial about distributed peer-to-peer networks, and there's an example that this distributed networks are great because for an attacker to hypothetically tamper with a block, they would not only have to hack into the computer of one person and tamper with this block, and then with this, and then change the hash, and rehash all of these blocks following. But they would have to do that on many different computers, or on at least like half of the computers. So that was just like an example to illustrate the concept of the power of distributed networks. In the proper 51% attack, what we talk about is 51% of the hash rate, not 51% of the nodes. The attack or this hypothetical example that we just described, which is not even considered an attack because it's impossible, as the way blockchains are constructed, it's just pretty much impossible to do that, simply because you would have to hack into computers of not just miners, but you'd have to hack into computers of nodes who are also part of the network, and there's so many more of those than miners. So that is basically the bottom line here, is that is not the 51% attack, and that is impractical or impossible even if you have more than 50% of the hash rate. So on that note, we're going to move on to what the 51% attack actually is. So here is what it is. So here we've got our miners, and this is the whole network of miners. This might not be like Bitcoin, as you can see when you have 8 miners here. It might be some other smaller cryptocurrency, small blockchain, like a startup type of blockchain. Plus we're not illustrating all of them. There's only 8 here, and maybe in total there's like 800 or something miners on the chain. So far 8,000. And they're just doing the thing, mining the blocks. There's some more blocks come in and so on. And then all of a sudden, this other group of miners joins them and joins the network. And so here they are, as you can see, they're red. So that's a hint that they're malicious. They're evil miners. And what they do is they say, hey guys, can we join your network? We want to mine your amazing cryptocurrency with you. Let's do this together. Or in fact, they don't actually talk that much. They just go into this network and they get a copy of this chain. They get a copy of the chain. They get, they set themselves up as if they're going to mine the network. So they get, what do they get? They get a copy of the chain. They get their mempools. They get everything set up. And so we're going to just remember that the point in time when they came into the network was this block. This was the most recent block. We're going to put an arrow here at the top. And then what these guys do is they all right, sayonara, and they close themselves off from the whole world. So they just cut off the connection, and they don't broadcast anything back to the network. And in fact, they don't even care what the network tries to broadcast to them. They just do their own thing now. And so what are they going to do? So these attackers are just going to keep mining. That's all they're doing. There's nothing like really, the concept of the attack is an attack, but they're not going to be doing anything illegal. They're not breaking into anybody's computers or anything like that. So then what happens, these guys keep mining. They get 2 blocks after a certain time. In the same time, because there's more miners here, they have more hash rate. They get more blocks. They get 4 blocks. These guys get 3 blocks. These guys get 5 blocks. These guys get 3 blocks. These guys get 4 blocks or something like that. Yeah. So basically, as we can see, because there's more of them, as more time passes, these mine some blocks, these mine more blocks, and the difference between them increases. And then all of a sudden, and the key thing here is that they're closed off, so they're not broadcasting information about the blocks that they're mining to this network. They're not timed. So this network is just doing their own thing. They don't even know that, they don't even know that what's going on here. They just think this is the only version of the chain. And then these miners all of a sudden open up the seal, they get back online, they connect back to this network, and they do start broadcasting. They start broadcasting the network. And so what happens here? So now we have, all of a sudden, in this whole full network, now this becomes a full network. In this full network, we have two competing chains. We have one competing chain, one second competing chain. And what is our golden rule of thumb? How is the algorithm going to decide which is the correct chain? The golden rule is that the longest chain wins. Longest chain is king. And therefore, these blocks are invalid. So the algorithm will look and we'll see, okay, up to here, the chains are identical. And then from here, they're different. Okay, so which one is longer? This one's longer. This one wins. This one has to go away, has to die off. And so basically, these guys effectively turn red. They become part of this chain. Now they're part of this chain. And so, again, has been nothing illegal happening. Nobody's like hacked into anybody's computer. What is the problem here? What's wrong then? Well, what is wrong is that now, like if these miners were smart from the start, then they could have gained a significant advantage, or they could have gained, profits from the double spend problem. And how does that happen? We mentioned the double spend problem previously. We mentioned the double spend problem in the tutorial on orphan blocks. And what that means is that now that these blocks have been cancelled out, all of their transactions, remember what happens to all of the transactions in these blocks? Well, they get released back into the mempool. And since now they're in the mempool, they are no longer confirmed transactions. They're no longer valid. So what these miners could have done is so at the very start, back here, when this block was being added, they could have just gone to this network and not as miners, but as nodes, and they could have just purchased lots of stuff. So they could have taken whatever, if this is Bitcoin, they could have gone and took their Bitcoin and bought yachts and Ferraris and airplanes, and exchange. Another good one is exchange that Bitcoin for Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash and Ether and other things. So spent a lot of their money, a lot of their cryptocurrency. And then, so those transactions would have gone into that block, but now that block is canceled out, so the transactions are free to go. But the transactions get out of the block, but they keep their assets, or they keep their Litecoins or Bitcoin Cash or Ether or Ferraris, whatever it is. They just get to keep it because it's a cryptocurrency. Well, nobody actually knows who they are, right? It's all done through keys. It's all done anonymously. Nobody can find them or track them down. That's a huge advantage of cryptocurrency. So nobody will ever find who they are. They're just gonna get to keep all their things that they bought. And what happens to those transactions? So a good question, right? So what happens? Like a lot of people don't really, well, as far as I can imagine, don't really look this through. Like a lot of people stop the explanation or analysis of a problem there. But the transaction get released back to the mempool. So how come those transactions can go back into new blocks, right? So the transaction that this miner bought a Ferrari could go back into a new block here. But because they still control 51% of the hash rate, they're not going to let that happen. They're not going to pick that transaction to go into the next block. These guys might try to do that, but they have less hashing power. So these guys are more likely to put in the next block. And so the next block won't hold any of those transactions that were released. That's important to understand, because if they don't have the 51% power after the attack is finished, then those transactions that were released into the mempools, they can get picked up and put back into the blocks later on. So even though there's a problem, it can be kind of fixed like that. But because they control still 51% of the mempool, they can just even mine empty blocks if they like, or they can just put other transactions, except for the ones that they don't want in there. They can just keep putting them in, and then a certain time will pass, and these transactions will be released out of the mempool back to their owners, because there's a rule, like for instance in Bitcoin right now, it's 72 hours, I think, that if your transaction is stuck in the mempool for 72 hours, then it gets released back to you, and it doesn't, nothing happens to it, because it maybe it's because the fees are too low or whatever else, and so transactions can get pushed out of the mempool back after a certain time. So that's all they have to do. They just have to not include transactions for a certain time. And so why is this so powerful? Another reason is because it can last for so long. You know, like with the orphaned blocks, we saw that that could happen for like 1 or 2 or 3 blocks maximum occasionally, and all the examples we saw were just like one block, one orphan block, and then right away the problem is like solved, because that happens kind of like accidentally. Whereas here it's done maliciously, and why it's also so powerful is because users on the blockchain, they usually have like an agreed time frame when transactions are considered properly confirmed, where they usually take like 6 blocks. So for instance, a transaction that's happened in this block only has 2 confirmations. One confirmation, 2. A confirmation is a new block that comes after the block. So so there we go. So this transaction has 2 confirmations, and normally what they do is they wait for 6 confirmations. Everything in this block is considered to already have 6 confirmations. So as a general rule of thumb, it's considered to be safe. That, okay, so since it's got 6 confirmations, we can say that it's pretty much safe. It's safe to say that there is going to be no double spend problem with the transactions in here or in here, because we've gone so far, so deep. They're so deep in the chain that they're probably not going to get reversed. The likelihood they're going to get reversed is very low. But in the case of an attack, that's what the attackers are betting on. And while on Bitcoin it's extremely hard to do something like this because of the immense hash rate that exists there already, on other chains it is possible. On other smaller cryptocurrencies, it might not be as lucrative financially, but it's still possible. And there we go. So that's the 51% attack. Very important notion, very important to understand what goes into it, and like understand what it's not and what it is. And as we can see, it's quite simple, and interestingly enough, it's not, like, as far as I understand, they're not doing anything illegal. There's just more of them, and they approach this mining process by secluding themselves for some time, and and then they double spend. Yes, they have malicious intent, but are they doing anything illegal? Not 100% sure about that. I don't know. Maybe they'll introduce laws around blockchains and Bitcoin and so on that this will be considered illegal in the future. But the threat is there. And what I wanted to recommend now at the end is a great article which I found very interesting. It's called "Choosing ASICs for SIA," and plus I added some comment here. Plus we suggest reading the comments at the bottom of this article. And the reason for that is this article was written by David Warwick, who's the CEO of SIA. It's a blockchain for storing. It's like a blockchain, like a Dropbox version of blockchain version of Dropbox, like storing file hosting. So it's a blockchain for file hosting, decentralized distributed file hosting, and so as you can see from the article, it's not called the 51% attack. It's actually about their choice of introducing ASICs, which we discussed before, into SIA. So they're the creators of SIA, and they want to introduce ASICs into their own blockchain so that people can, excuse me, so that people can mine their blockchain with ASICs. So it's about that. But he really goes into a lot of detail on the 51% attack. One of the big reasons why they're choosing to introduce ASICs is the 51% attack. The reason why I'm suggesting to read the comments is because by reading the article, you can get really dragged away into his way of thinking, which might be a valid argument, but he has a very, very one sort. It's like only describing everything from one position. That why it's good is definitely good for their network. And while you will learn a lot about the 51% attack and how it's good or bad and how it can be beneficial or not for, how it can be cost effective or not for in different types of scenarios, you can also develop like a very one-sided view of why ASICs are good for a small blockchain. So the people in the comments, they actually they dispute that. They have different opinions. So just not to get overwhelmed by the amount of arguments that he gives, check the comments so that you get a different perspective on the other issues that he discusses in the article. So there we go. That's our 51% attack. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and now you know what the 51% attack is all about. And I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, enjoy blockchains.